This is video 3 of the Psych 642 MANOVA assignment. So when the video cut off last time, I was creating the plot that goes along with the discriminant function analysis. And this is the plot here. You can see that variant 1 seems to discriminate the clinical psychology degrees from the counseling degrees, and then variant 2 seems to discriminate mental health counseling, which you can see is mostly at or above 0 here, from the counseling psychology doctor degree, which most of those are kind of at or along or below the 0 here. So that is the end of the first study. So now I'm going to do the exact same process again for the second study of looking at perceived competence with bisexual clients, as well as perceived multicultural competence as the two outcome variables. So I'm not going to go through and explain step by step in detail like I did for the first one, so I'm just going to run through it and briefly talk about what I'm doing. So I'm going to attach the second data set so that it can be used, and I'm going to go ahead and clear the console so that things don't get messy. I'm going to factor again, and then get some more descriptive statistics. So the descriptive statistics for PVC are going to be the same because it's the same variable, just being used again for this study. And then we can see that both of the counseling degrees have higher multicultural competence, or appear to have higher multicultural competence than the clinical degrees. So now I am once again going to look at the assumptions. So the homogeneity of covariance matrices will be first, and that's done the same way as it was last time. We could see that once again, perceived competence with bisexual clients, the variances are not equal. And then there's also some variation in the variance of the multicultural competence variance. And then there's also some variance in the covariances. So this assumption is not met. So once again, I'll be using the Pillai's trace test statistic for this, since this assumption has not been met, and the Pillai's statistic seems to be the most robust against this type of issue. Alright, so next I will be testing for multivariate normality. So once again, just as before, I have to separate the different groups out. So I'm going to do that first, and then I'm going to run multivariate Shapiro tests, all of which come out to be not significant. So the assumption of normality, of multivariate normality, is met. Next, I'm going to set the contrast by, once again, creating different variables to represent the contrasts and then binding them together. So now I can start to build my MANOVA model, which, just like last time, I have to start out by combining the two outcome variables into one outcome variable. So I'm going to do that. Then I'm going to create the model using the MANOVA function. And then use the summary. And we can see that there is a significant effect of degree on these outcomes of perceived competence, both multicultural and bisexual competence. So now I'm going to use the summary.aov function to break this apart a little bit more and look at the effect on each outcome variable separately. You can see that degree does seem to have a significant effect on both of the outcome variables, perceived multicultural competence and perceived competence in working with bisexual clients. So now I'm going to use the LM function to set up individual linear models for each of the outcomes so that I can look at the plan contrasts. Which I'll be interested in both of these since both were significant. So it appears that there's a significant difference in, just like we saw last time, it's the same thing. Perceived competence in working with bisexual clients, there was a significant difference between those with counseling degrees and those with clinical degrees, but not for master's versus doctorate counseling degrees. And then we see the exact same thing for perceived multicultural competence, that the counseling versus clinical was significant, but not master's versus doctorate. So then finally, once again, do the discriminant function analysis. From this, we can see that two different variants resulted. One that explains 99.6% of the variance, and another that explains 0.4% of the variance. And then using the plot, we can see that LD1 seems to discriminate the clinical psychology from the counseling. And LD2, from the plot, I really can't tell what it discriminates, because it appears to be fairly balanced between the two. So I'm not really sure how to make sense of that. Alright, so now that the analysis is done, I'm going to take some time to show where information from the statistical output is included in the summary of findings. So we can see here that it starts out with just the basic general finding of the MANOVA, which can be found here. We'll report the PLI statistic, which is found right here, as well as the degrees of freedom, which are listed here. the F value, which is listed here, and then the significance, which in this case is less than 0.001. The next thing that's reported is the separate univariate ANOVAs on the different outcome variables, which the information for those is found here. Once again, be reporting the F statistic, which for first one is here, second one is here, as well as the degrees of freedom, which can be found here and here, and then the p-value, which can be found here and there. The next thing reported is the planned contrast, which in this instance I'll only be looking at the planned contrast for the perceived competence for bisexual clients, because that is what came up significant in the univariate ANOVA. So specifically, the t-values and degrees of freedom were reported. So the t-values are right here. And then the degrees of freedom are here. And then the p-values can be found right here. And all of that is included in this part of the summary. What should also be included in the explanation for the planned contrast is the specific means and standard deviations of the different groups, which I plan to add in before turning in the assignment. But those can be found from the descriptive statistics here with the means and standard deviations. So they'll be placed in to their respective spots in the narrative. So for the discriminant function analysis, the first thing reported is how much of the variance is explained by each variate, and that is found right here in the proportion of trace section, so 96% and 4%, which is reported here. The next thing that's reported is the coefficients of the discriminant functions, which are the b values, and those are found in this section here. They're reported throughout here. And the last thing is looking to see what each of the variates or functions actually discriminated, and you use the plot to determine this, and then it gets reported in the narrative. So you would look specifically, if you're looking at LD1, you would draw a line here and see what falls more on one side of the line than the other, and then the same for this way, so that you can see what actually gets discriminated. So the write-up for this second study is pretty much, it has the same information, it came from the same place in the output. The only real difference here is the inclusion of more information about the planned contrast, because I had to report both sets of planned contrast, because both of the univariate ANOVAs came up significant. So that's really the only difference between the two. All the information came from the same place. So, reporting pelage, reporting the F values, reporting the significance, reporting the F values and degrees of freedom and significance for each of the ANOVAs, and then reporting the T values and significance and degrees of freedom for and contrasts. This all comes from these outputs here. For the DFA, the percentage, the B values, and the discrimination all comes from here in the plot. the proportion and the coefficients of linear discriminants.